call this meeting to order.
We forgot to put the flag salute on there.
Oh, yeah, it is. Let's, flag salute. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Wagner,
Here.
Commissioner Magyar,
Here.
Commissioner Satanovich,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Linder is absent, Commissioner Itica,
Here.
Chair Crushauer.
Here. All right. So I have a motion to adopt the agenda as is.
Move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Business from the public. This is an opportunity for anyone to give a brief presentation about any land use planning issue or county concern that is not on the agenda, and there's nobody here. I don't see anybody online. Is there anybody online? All right, moving right along. Work session. Item number 2, Clear and Objective Standards Code Audit, Draft 2, Articles 2 and 3.
Okay, yep, ready. So thank you, Chair. Just for the record, Gail Henriksen, Community Development Director. So this month, we are looking at our second draft of Articles 2 and 3. Article 2 deals with the procedures that we use and how we process applications and the different standards that you need to comply with. And then Article 3 are siting standards, so things that cover parking, street construction, signs, water supply, things like that. So with Article 2, we had discussed this earlier with our draft of Article 1, but that was about a year ago. And so we had proposed at that time significant changes to our procedures. Right now, we have 7 different procedures that we can follow to process applications. A lot of them overlap. Some of them have conflicting requirements, even though they're basically the same type of procedure. So we are proposing to reduce that down to 4. So you would have your standard Type 1, 2, 3, and 4 procedures. Type 1 is the very simple things like a geohazard report, a floodplain permit, a temporary use application, things that require very little, if any, discretion, that are have already clear quantifiable standards that you can apply to the request. Type 2 conditional use would still be processed the same, 10-day public period, no public hearing. That procedure really won't change very much. We are proposing to eliminate the Type 1C, which is a Type 1, but supposedly more complex. In the past, it's been applied to floodplain permits, but really we don't use it. It's just a straight Type 1. And then we also have a 2R procedure, which is a review use, which is very similar to a conditional use, except that there's a published ad that goes along with it. And so we are proposing to eliminate the Type 2R and just make everything a Type 2. And then we have a Type 2A procedure, which is the conditional use that would require a public hearing, but it's also very similar in terms of the requirements for notification, published ad, posting the property. It's the same procedure that we would use for a Type 3 if we were looking at a variance. So we're going to combine the 2A and the 3 so that they're together as one. And then the Type 4 is legislative. So the clear and objective standards, anything that gets adopted by ordinance, things that are policy related, those are considered legislative applications, and they are always a Type 4. And so that process will really not be changing much. So I'm going to pause right there for a moment to see if there's any questions about the different types of applications and the procedures. I can go through each one in more detail if you'd like.
I have a question about some of them, like a type 2, procedure type, some of them are decisions by a director, and some of them are by a hearings officer,
Mm-hmm.
or similarly with a type 3, some of them are by a hearings officer, some of them are by the Board of Commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it make sense to have them, a certain type of procedure be a certain type of hearing? Or is there some other reason why they're different types with different hearing bodies?
Yeah, so not every application requires a hearing. So none of the type ones would ever go to a hearing or get a public notice. And so when the decision to issue the permit is made, it's, the staff person issues the permit, but in theory, it's the department director who oversees the work and is the responsible person for ultimately the decision. When you get to a type 2, there is a public notice, but not a public hearing. And so again, that decision, when it's issued, comes from a staff person, but ultimately it falls upon the director. And so when a decision by the director is appealed, according to the way the code is currently written and your planning commission bylaws, those go to the hearings officer on appeal. And the hearings officer conducts a new hearing as if none of the information had ever been seen before. It's called a de novo hearing. And so the hearings officer would just process that, and then if there is an appeal from that, it goes to the Board of Commissioners. With a type 3, which is where you have a public hearing, or what we currently call type 2A, so that decision does not fall on the director. It falls, again, because of the bylaws and the way the code is written. Those decisions cases go directly to the hearings officer. And again, if the decision is appealed, it gets appealed directly to the Board of Commissioners, and from there it goes up to LUBA. And then with type 4, all of those will come to the Planning Commission for a recommendation. You make your recommendation to the board, they make the ultimate decision. The appeal from there is to LUBA. The one thing that's a little bit different in the entire process is if you had a subdivision that would have county roads in it, then the board has to accept the subdivision because we're taking over maintenance and responsibility for the roads. So your planning commission would review it, make a recommendation to the board. If there's a county road, the board makes the ultimate decision. If there's no public county roads in it, then the planning commission makes that final decision, and you are the final approver of the subdivision. I don't know if that answered your question or just muddied the waters, but.
That is helpful. Question on how the hearings officer works, and how do we hire, who is the hearings officer, and how does that?
Yeah, so the hearings officer, we just went out for a new 3-year contract this current fiscal year. So our current hearings officer is Rebecca Dorman. She, I believe, is out of the Portland area, and so our hearings right now are all conducted virtually. So we don't require anybody to come here to the Boynton or set up a hearing or import the hearings officer here and pay those expenses. So everything's done virtually. It's a 3-year contract. We did an RFP, request for proposals, back before July 1st of this year. We had, I can't remember how many responses we had this go around, but, and then, we have a committee usually that looks at the applications we receive, makes a recommendation, and then, based on the contract amount, which has always been under $30,000 a year, it doesn't have to go to the board for approval. It goes just to the county manager for approval. So as we move through the habitat conservation plan and see more of the impacts on us financially, that will probably change in the future, and we'll just bring everything to the planning commission, which will change your workload.
Okay. One thought, so most of the time when there's an appeal, is it by an applicant or is it by an outside, may say a neighbor or somebody else? I know it can be appealed by either party.
Yeah, I would say.
Where I'm going with that is that if an applicant has a problem with a hearings or a director decision, in some of these cases, it goes to a hearings officer, which is essentially another government person rather than a government body.
Mm-hmm.
So, of appointed or elected people. It's just, I guess the next step after that would be another appeal to an elected body if they disagree, if an applicant disagreed with, a decision by the department, if you will.
Right. So you can appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court in theory.
Mhm.
So regardless of who hears the initial case, who hears the initial appeal, the pathway forward is still the same. You go from the county level of appeals to the state, to the circuit court, and then you go up the court chain from there. I would say that probably at least 80% of the decisions are appealed by an outside body, not the applicant. A lot of our appeals come from ORCA, the Oregon Coast Alliance, who has probably filed 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 appeals that I'm aware of. You know, so I don't know where I'm going with that, but,
No, I was just curious on
you know,
that.
the criteria, though, are the same. So whether the planning commission hears the appeal or the hearings officer, you're still using the same criteria. So if the criteria says the applicant has to provide, you know, a road that's 14 feet wide, and the applicant is appealing that, that criteria doesn't change. There's not discretion. So the hearings officer looks at it and says the standard is 14 feet. The road provided is only 12 feet, 12 is not 14. So when the planning commission looks at it, you still have those same criteria. There's not an area of discretion that is given to the planning commission that says, you know, based upon some non-land use related circumstance, you have the right to waive the requirements or change the requirements or accept a requirement that isn't different. You still have to meet the same criteria.
So I see that a variance would be a type 3 procedure, and that is a hearings officer.
Right,
So-
and that's the way it currently is as well. We're not proposing any changes to that.
Okay, that helps. Just trying to get an understanding of how these different decisions are made.
So, and that's why in the staff reports, we always lay out all the criteria. We include the applicant's response because it is, the burden of proof is on the applicant every time you submit an application. And then we respond to say, this is what the code says, this is what the applicant has proposed. Either they meet it or they don't, or we put a condition of approval on so that they can meet it. But the reports generally should be, all based on code. And the responses should all be based on code, and the decision needs to be based on code. It's when you start straying into areas of, well, we know Jim over here is gonna do the right thing because, you know, he's grown up in the area and he's been here a long time and we know the quality of work he does, we know he'll do the right thing, we're just not gonna, you know, put a condition of approval on him, even though his application doesn't clearly meet the standard. That's where you start to run into trouble. And when you get up to the Land Use Board of Appeals, they will send it back, and they will ask you to make clear findings that state either he does meet the code or he doesn't. So those are the procedures.
You guys were going through, we're simplifying it down to 4, from 7 or 8 or however many there
7,
were.
yeah.
When you guys were doing that, and started looking back and forth, going through the strike-through versus what's new and all that, the cross-referencing, did you guys take type 1 and leave it as type 1, and then anything that was extra, did you dump it into type 2, and then same thing with type 2 to type 3 to make it, or did we go through and say what would require, like a type 1A or whatever? Did we go through and try and simplify the application process, or did we return kind of dumbing it down, make it harder and more expensive for some of these extra ones? You understand what I'm asking by that? Like a type 1 before was a type 1, simple, over the counter, I get that, but then there was the type 1, 1A or,
Yeah, there's a 1C.
Did you take that C portion of it and just dump it into 2, and then the same thing with 2, you know, anything that doesn't trigger just a simple type 1, type 2, type 3, because you had all those extras, did they just dump into the next bucket, or?
So, for example, the type 1C, which doesn't even exist in the code, it's a process that the previous director had set up and was only used for floodplain permits. We dumped it down to a type 1.
That's what I was asking.
Okay, so, and then where you had a 2A, which is a conditional use that requires a public hearing. It requires a published ad, it requires posting of the property, and it requires written notice to all surrounding property owners. It's identical to a type 3. Exact same process. So we just called it a type 3 instead of a 2A. The type 2R, which is a review use, which we don't use very often, does not require a public hearing. It requires a published ad. It requires notice to surrounding property owners. And so we're going to be bumping that down to a type 2. So the only threes we have are subdivisions and variances at this point. And I guess if you came in for, even that would be a type 4. And then type 4 would just be rezonings, amendments to the code, amendments to the zoning map, amendments to the comp plan, and any new legislative policy that we were going to create, and that all stays the same. So, as we go forward, right now we're focused primarily on housing, because that's what clear and objective standards is all tied to, is housing. But as we go forward into the next fiscal year, and we'll talk about this later on our agenda as part of the work plan discussion, we do need to include an item in the work plan that looks at the commercial and industrial zones as well, because there's probably some areas where you can simplify it. Pretty much everything in a commercial and industrial use right now is a conditional use, because there is a lot of discretion that goes into it. So you're looking case by case, what are the person's hours of operations? What is the type of business that they're doing? How many customers will they have? How many employees? And sometimes that will change your requirements. Sometimes you will have a conditional use for a home occupation where someone is doing production work of furniture on a fairly substantial scale, or coffee roasting, which comes with odors and sound and things where you have to have a bit more discretion, and it's not clear-cut enough where you can say, we're just going to make it a type 1. You know, maybe something like a restaurant where it's pretty clear and objective that, you know, if you're a restaurant, you have this many seats, you have this much parking. There's not a lot of discretion there unless they're making something really obnoxious. And there's a case in Portland where a Vietnamese restaurant ran into all sorts of trouble because the neighbors complained about the odors of the restaurant. So, I don't know. But that's a whole different discussion. So.
With these list of procedure types, are there some in here that could be lowered to a lower type of procedure, like say a variance from a type 3 to a type 2?
No.
To simplify things like that, or?
No, because it requires a public hearing.
Okay.
So that's going to be set in stone.
That was just one example, but if there were other areas that might be able to make things a little bit easier, that's what we're trying to look at. And I'm not exactly sure by looking at all these if what would be, if there's a easier way to get things done or not.
I mean, we looked at it, but for the most part, by taking out the 3 extra processes that we don't need. So, for example, if you look on page 8 of your agenda, that's where table 2.1 starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gives you a breakdown of what type of review each permit would go through. So agritourism events, they get approved through a conditional use because they're in the EFU zone. When they come in to renew their events, they have to go through the same process. Appeals are pretty much written in stone under state statute. There's not really any leeway that you have to say it's all just going to be a type 1, no public notice, no public hearing. You can't conduct an appeal like that. Commercial site plan review, we have never done one where somebody just came in and, you know, that's something that when we're done dealing with the housing issues, then we will come back and look at that one. Let's see, comprehensive plan, map amendment. I don't know why these all say 3. They should say 4. Map amendment, quasi-judicial, sorry. Yeah, so if you come in with a map amendment just for your property, it's considered quasi-judicial because it's only affecting your one property. If you came in and said, I want to rezone all of RA2 to something and change the rules for it, and it affects everybody in the county, then it's legislative, and it would be a type 4. A conditional use, again, because the conditional uses are usually not as clear-cut as a type 1, where you just come in, you meet your setbacks, you meet your building height, whatever it is, and there's more discretion. They are considered land use decisions. There's a type 2 requirement in state statute that you have to send out public notices for those. There may be some items, not necessarily in the housing arena, which we're looking at now, but in the future when we come back and look at commercial and industrial uses, that a public hearing for a conditional use, there may be some uses that we can move down. There aren't very many of them right now. There's some, but yeah, and a lot of them are in the farm and forest zones. Destination resort, I think you would want to have a public hearing on that. That's where you're gonna have somebody come in with like a Sun River type of development. I don't think you'd wanna do that as a 1 or a 2. You know, I know we try to be friendly, but that's a very big impact development, and I think you'd wanna hold a public hearing on that. Development permit is type 1, that's pretty straightforward. Same with the extension, floodplain, geohazard permit. A goal exception is a type 4. I mistakenly put type 3 there, but that's always going to be legislative, adopted by ordinance. So, because you are basically taking a variance from the comp plan. So, that's never going to be a type 1, and it's never going to be a type 2. Lot of record, pretty straightforward. Partitions, they are considered land use decisions, and under state law, we have to send a public notice, so those are going to be bumped up to a type 2. Planned development is very similar to a destination resort, again, a big impact development with a mix of potential retail and residential uses, so you definitely want to get your public input on that. Property line and replacement dwelling sign permits, all type 1. A similar use determination is when we did this several years ago where somebody wanted to move TP Freight out to Miles Crossing, and we didn't have that type of use listed in the zoning code, but it was similar enough that you could kind of say, yeah, it's like this. But there is a process you have to go through. So as a director, I can't just say, good enough, we'll call it this. There's a process you have to go through, because in a way you're amending the zoning code to include this type of use. So that has to go through a public hearing. Subdivision approvals, there are 2 types, depending on, what type of roadways are proposed. They will either be a 2 or a 3. And then temporary use, pretty straightforward. Validation of a unit of land that ends up with the recording of a partition. So when you validate a unit of land, there is language in state statute that says if somebody created a parcel but didn't go through the proper zoning approvals that were in effect at the time, you can still go back and retroactively get that approval. But when you do that, then you have to record a plat to formalize it. So, and again, because the partition is considered a land use decision and requires notification, it's going to be a type 2. Variance we've talked about. Zoning map amendments are either going to be quasi-judicial if they're tied to a specific property, or legislative if they're covering multiple pieces of property. So zoning review in conjunction with a building permit application, this is something new, and this is going to replace the development permit. So the development permit right now, you come in and all we're doing is checking your setbacks, your building height, you're making sure you've got an erosion control plan, and we're telling you what other permits you need. So we're just going to call that what it is, which is a zoning review. We don't actually permit you to build anything with a development permit. It's just going to be a zoning review. So the process will stay the same. It's just going to have a new title. You'll still require all the sign-offs from fire and water and everybody else. Zoning text amendment, again, that's where you're actually amending the code and changing the rules. That's always going to be legislative. So, again, in terms of housing production, which is what we're focused on here, between this and the law doc amendments, I think that we have accomplished a lot. I mean, is it ever going to be perfect? No, probably not, and there's probably more things that we could do. But I think that we've hit all the major points, and that as we move forward into the next fiscal year, and begin working on commercial and industrial areas to see what we can simplify, for our constituents, then we'll do that.
So if someone comes in for a subdivision application that they would want a variance along with that, could that automatically go to the higher body and bypass the hearings officer if the subdivision application itself would, have to go to a higher body?
So the applications would need to be combined. So when we get multiple applications for one project, we're required to combine them, and then they go to the hearings body that has the highest tier of application. So if you had a type 2 and a type 3, it would always go up to the type 3 level,
Okay,
so.
all right. Well, thank you for going through all those. I think that's important work. Try to figure out if they're in the right slot and the right body's making the decision for those, so that
Yeah.
clears it up for me.
And when we get to Article 4, the draft 2 of Article 4 next month, that's all the zoning codes where you will see what is listed as a type 1, what is a type 2 use, what is going to be a type 3 use, and you will be able to see those. And again, focusing on housing for this particular project, because that's our directive here, is to focus on housing. But also to think about future work that we may need to take on.
I got a question. Why is the planning commission not utilized more? I mean, we're only on one of these, and that's subdivision, division, or decision. The planning commission body is not utilized on anything.
So the code was like this when I arrived. I don't know exactly how long it's been with this directive. I understand, just from institutional history, that in the past, there's been an issue, when variances were taken to the planning commission, that the planning commission was not using the criteria that you measure a variance by, that they were, as I said, making these decisions based on, well, we know so-and-so, we know so-and-so is reliable, you know, their project is good, we need this project in Clatsop County, but not following the criteria. And I think that was part of the issue, that at some point a previous director has made decisions that changed that code, and so it's in the code, it's in the bylaws. And, you know, like I said, right now we are in the middle of a 3-year contract with the hearings officer. As we transition out of that contract, we will be looking at that again, because I know that we are going to need to pick up some savings, most likely, unless something drastic happens that changes our fiscal situation. So things would come back to you. Again, I just needed to stress that the criteria don't change whether you're the hearings officer reviewing it or the planning commission. And, you know, I think having that, being able for the planning commission to, members to be able to make that separation, because it's a very small county, and, you know, we all wear multiple hats and play multiple roles and interact with multiple people. So it's important to have that distance, and so sometimes it's a little easier with a hearings officer who doesn't have any ties to the county to be able to come in and maybe in a more controversial case or, you know, emotional case, to have that distance.
I think that's an excellent point, Gail, and I look on this planning commission here, and many of us are representing industries that would be, you know, utilizing the codes to make money. And I'm not saying that we're all a bunch of corrupt individuals, but I think the outsider serving as the hearings officer is an excellent point. And I'm just looking back to when, I mean, I'm sure Carrie knows and can remember, even in 16, 17, 18, 19, when I was serving, I think it appeared we had more hearings where actual people came in and sat down, and and asked us questions, and we had to make some decisions. And maybe that's just a sign of the times at the time, but it's certainly been extremely slow, for sure, for like a couple of years now. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I'm sort of happy that we as a group, the Planning Commission, isn't really making a lot of decisions. I don't think that's really our place as an appointed individual, but that's just my opinion on that. Thank you, Gail, for that excellent synopsis, by the way.
You're welcome.
Would, items that go to the Board of Commissioners, would they come to us first for recommendation?
The only one that would be a subdivision with a county road, that the board needed to accept. And the legislative items that come to you in ordinance form where you make a recommendation to the board. So I'm trying to think, for example, a few months ago, we did the psilocybin and the Army Corps goal exceptions and the Law Dock housing amendments. So those were all ordinances, legislative type 4 procedures where you, as a planning commission, review it, you conduct a public hearing, and then you look at everything, and then you make your recommendation to the board, either to adopt it as it's presented, to deny it, or you can make amendments to it and send it up to the board as well. Okay. So if there's no more questions about procedures right at this moment, some of the other things that we did with Article 2 was to, it was very poorly written, and things were scattered throughout in no cohesive order. So we have worked to basically rewrite it, put all the Type 1 procedures together, the Type 2, the Type 3, the Type 4. We found a lot of redundancies that we either combined or eliminated. Tried to make the language much clearer, easier to understand, because even for staff, sometimes we read this and we just have to parse it out and it takes forever. So hopefully we have accomplished that to a significant degree. We also, I'm trying to think, we'll be looking, just changing terminology on the conditional uses so that what we have previously called a Type 2 and 2A conditional use would just become a minor and a major conditional use. Minor would be, still remain a Type 2, no changes to the procedure. A major would be a Type 3, what was previously a 2A, but again, no changes to the procedure, it's just changes to the terminology. I think those were the highlights in Article 2. Yeah, so that was Article 2. And then in Article 3, when we had initially brought this forward.
Gail?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I had a question on page 10.
Uh-huh.
Type 1 is over the counter, right? That's just
Yeah, so,
you or your staff make a decision over the counter, there's no public notice, no hearings, no extra stuff, correct?
yeah, so not every Type 1 will be over the counter. So for example, with a geologic hazard permit or a floodplain permit, those are a little bit more complex. You need to look at them a little more closely. I mean, we could probably make people wait, but it would take a couple hours. And we don't want to make anybody do that. So we usually issue those within a day or two.
I was just, on page 10, it says Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3, you have 150 days to make a final decision.
Right.
That seems a little excessive for a Type 1, that none of that stuff is even required on. Type 2, I could see, because there's hearings, there's notices. I mean, we're talking almost 5 months to make, I mean, if it comes down to that, to make a decision on a Type 1, that should be something that you just said, even, a couple of days.
So under state statute, we are given 150 days. So that is the rule of the state. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're obligated to take 149 days of that 150. I will tell you that with some floodplain permits, where you get a permit in that's incomplete, you issue your notice of incomplete application, and then you wait for 5 months before you get any response back or get the information you need. Those permits don't get issued over the counter. They don't get issued within a week. sometimes they time out because we don't get the information that we need.
That would be failure on the applicant's part,
Right.
not the county's part,
Right.
though, to issue a final decision, because you can't issue a final decision without all the applications. But,
Right.
I mean, to me, that time frame would start when you get everything you need.
So the way that the statute is written is you get an application in, you have 30 days as staff to review it and determine whether or not it's complete. You have to deem it complete or incomplete within 30 days. After that, and you have to notify the applicant of what's missing. The applicant then has 180 days after that, because the whole time period, everything has to be approved within 180 days, from the time you submit to the time, or the time you have a complete application to the time you're done. And so, I forgot where I was going now. So we deem it incomplete, we send a notice out, and then in the notice, the applicant either has to provide us with all the information that's missing, provide us some of the information and a written statement that they're not providing any additional information, or tell us they're not going to provide any information at all. And at which point, if they give us all the information, it's complete, we can process it and issue it. If they say we're not going to give you anything more, then at that point, we have to deny the application because it's incomplete and we don't have the information we have. If it's that middle one where they say, well, I'm going to give you some of the stuff you asked for, but not the rest, I mean,
Incomplete.
usually it's still incomplete. We try to continue to work with them, but if they're not going to give us anything, then it's going to be incomplete and we're going to deny it.
Yeah,
So, but that's the way the state rules are set up.
all right.
So,
Type 1, I think, I mean, that's just a long time.
They won't be taking that long on a type 1.
That's what I would hope, too.
They still, I mean, that's just what the state allows them, but it's not intended to be type 1, take that long.
no. And we track our performance measures, so we have goals that we have set, thresholds and benchmarks that go into our budget every year, where we look at, you know, how long is it taking us to issue decisions. You know, one thing that we've been trying to focus on since pandemic is we get a lot of incomplete applications. Before pandemic, we would just tell people, if your application's incomplete, we're not accepting it. And then when pandemic came in, people were just throwing things piecemeal into the box outside the door because nobody could come in. You know, we were working with people, but I think we're gonna have to go back to that system, so that we're not taking in things that are incomplete, that are lingering for 4 or 5 or 6 months and no response. So, I mean, you know, we tell people at the counter, this is what you need, but it's probably more efficient in the end for them to bring in a complete application than it is for them to make a trip, drop stuff off, we put it in a pile, we make sure that we don't lose the pile, misplace the pile, remember where the pile is. They come back, bring in some more stuff, we add it to the pile, then they come back a third time because now they finally got everything else. I mean, it saves them trips, it saves us having to track all the pieces that are coming in piecemeal, so.
I get that. I mean, I know I've been on the other side of that as well, and sometimes you don't know everything that you need, even though there's extra things that are needed, and I get that, but after it's all completed, then the 150 days starts even if it's not a completed application. So if I come in and I just turn in a piece of paper that says this is what I want to do with none of the requirements, does that 150 days start then, or does it start after you then send me an email or a letter in the mail saying, hey, we got your application, but we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items? Once you receive all those items, then does that start, or does it start?
So the clock starts when you submit your application, and so then that gives staff 30 days to review it, to make sure it's complete. And if it's complete, then we have another 150 days to issue the decision. I mean, usually it doesn't take that long.
Gotcha.
And it's mainly for like a type 2 or a type 3. So if somebody submits for a type 3, you know, we have to get the public notice out, we have to post the property, we have to publish an ad, and we have to schedule the hearings officer.
And that's what my point was. I get it for type 2 and type 3 and
Yeah.
type 4, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. I understand that.
So if you turn in an application, we deem it complete, say the 30 days have passed, you get your incomplete letter, the clock still continues. So you are ticking out the clock then until 180 days has ended. So all total, it's 180 days. You get 30 days for your completeness review, 150 days to finish reviewing the permit, issue the permit. So the clock still is ticking while you're incomplete, and then at some point, you're just gonna time out.
Still have.
All right, any other questions about procedure right at the moment? Okay, and then, with regard to Article 3, which are the siting standards, we, removed a lot of stuff, that we're just gonna take out just for the sake of time, as part of this process, and that's based on a recent court decision that was issued, out of a case out of Cannon Beach, that said that, road standards are not required to be, they're not part of needed housing. They're infrastructure to housing, but they are not housing themselves. So your standards do not have to meet the clear and objective standards in terms of roads or other things like that. So just for the sake of, timing here, because we're moving forward and we've got to be adopted and through our appeal process by July 1st. We're taking those out and putting them into next year's work plan so that we can continue working on them. They may even come forward later this year, but we just needed to take them out because they're not required at this point, and we just needed some time to get through stuff. We've been hit with, LUBA cases and some other things that we'll discuss under the director's report that have taken some time away from staff and other projects that we're working on. So, we took out all the farm and forest stuff, because there have been new roles that went into effect January 1st of this year. And so we'll need to, be reviewing and amending the code, in the next few months anyway, so we're gonna take all that out. We, took out the access control standards, from consideration as part of clear and objective standards, as well as some of the other, street design, standards that were originally reviewed as part of draft 1. And again, they are on the work plan. We're not just giving up on them, but we're just taking them out, and they'll be part of a different project in the near future. And I think those are the highlights out of Articles 2 and 3. Next month, we're gonna bring Article 4, which are all the zoning standards, for draft 2, and then hopefully, unless there's any significant concerns or changes from your commission at next month's meeting, we are gonna be bringing the public hearing in March, so that we can go to the board in April, and then, if there are any appeals, hopefully we can be through those by July 1st. And,
One public hearing, they have 2, right?
yep. Other than that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions you might have about process or citing standards or anything else, in Articles 2 or 3.
In the language, there are references to different subsections, which I find it a little bit cumbersome to use when it's constantly referring you to another section of the code. Is there a way, maybe in some cases, to, if it's not too lengthy, to include that subsection where it refers you to in parentheses or something that, here's what that section says, rather than having to flip over or try to dig through some other portion of the code to find where it's referring you to?
Yeah, there are probably some instances, I don't know if you have a specific one that you were,
Might
caught
be
your eye.
easier online if you can click that and it'll send you directly to that section. I don't know if you're able to do the hot link or whatever.
yeah, I'm sure that we probably could, but,
That would just make it easier. I know that there's just a lot of that it may be impossible to do what I'm asking just because it'd be too lengthy to try to, I'm just, I don't even know if this one works here, but on page 22, where it talks about an appeal, that type 1 decision can be appealed in accordance with table 2.1, and then you'd have to go find where section, table 2.1 is at.
Yeah, so for example, in that particular case, I think we just want to reference the table, only because otherwise we would have to repeat the table again in that in the section on page 22.
Okay. I guess there's other spots that refer to certain ORSs, where then you have to go look at ORSs, what the ORSs are. So it just gets a little, I mean, that's just the way code is, I suppose, but
Yeah,
constantly flipping from one spot to another, trying to figure out where
yeah,
it means.
we generally try not to quote the ORS because they change so often, and every time they change, then we have to amend our code.
Right.
So. Yeah, but we,
It's tough sometimes as a layman trying to go through this and you're trying to find something, and it's not just here, it's everywhere. You're trying to reference this, then back to this, and this, and I mean, I've had it all spread out over my desk trying to, and it gets confusing, and it shouldn't be confusing, it should be clear and present. I mean, it should be easy to read for anybody to read it, not know exactly what to do, where to look for, and all that. Tables, I get it, that was maybe a bad representation, or a bad example, but I get what he's talking about, because, there's a lot of referring to other things. And that's all over the code.
That's all
That-
over,
It's
yeah.
everywhere.
I mean, we can look and see if there's things that we can, repeat in the code, and see if there is. The hot links and things, that won't be done as part of this project, I can tell you that right now, but, it's something that we can, put on our work plan.
So here's an example. So, what Carrie was just saying, like, the type 1 decision can be appealed in accordance with table 2.1. So you go to 2.1, you go to type 1, and it says the appeal goes to the hearings officer. So why couldn't it just say type 1 decision can be appealed in accordance with, or appealed to the hearings officer? I mean, does that
Yeah,
simplify it a
kind of,
little bit?
Yeah, just trying to keep it all in one spot, rather than having to bounce to another part of the code. In places where you're able to, I know maybe it's impossible to do it everywhere for everything, but
I guess, because, like you were saying, if like an ORS changes, the table can change and we can, easier to reference if table changes instead of going back and making 20 different corrections, you only have to make one in the table. Anybody have anything else on Articles 2 or 3 of the Fair and Objective Standards Code Audit, Draft 2?
if we wanted to review a certain section, like a variance procedure, would this be the time to do it? Wanted to change specifics in, review that specifically, what we would want to change in the procedure, is now that time, or is that something we can do?
I think that just for the sake of efficiency, since a variance is not directly tied to housing provision, I mean, I guess you could look at it now. Preferably, it would be better to do it as a separate procedure. I think there are specific guidelines, and I would need to verify this, that variances are required to follow. So I'm not sure what procedures you would like to change, but it's always going to be a public hearing, and there are specific criteria that they're always going to have to meet. So,
It's just been my personal experience with variances, that they can be, seems like something should be really easy to get a variance for, whether it's some kind of setback issue or some kind of access issue or whatever it may be, but it can get a little bit cumbersome, and it seems like it's unnecessarily that way in some cases. So I would like to put that up as something to look at in the future, if there's a way to simplify a variance procedure.
Yeah,
And I know a lot of times when you're doing a subdivision or other application, a variance can play into it. You may need a variance as well as everything else that goes along with it, and some applications may be dependent on a variance occurring before you can actually do what you'd like to do.
okay. Yeah, so variances by their nature are meant to have a very high bar. They're not supposed to be easy. So, you know, it shouldn't be that if I want to go 1 inch over my setback line, and you want to get a variance for that, I mean, it should be hard. I mean, why can't you pull your development in an inch? Variances are meant to be hard. If there is such an issue that nobody can build in Clatsop County unless they go 1 inch over their setbacks, then the code needs to change. So,
Here's an example of that,
yeah,
because I just went for one, and I just did it within the city limits. You've got 40 or 50 houses on a road that don't meet those, they're all in a row, right? You're just trying to do exactly what every other house in the development did, but with new setbacks and new standards, you're nowhere near that. So to go, and we're talking inches again, well, actually, a couple feet, but if you build that house to the current code, it's going to offset the entire neighborhood in a weird way that doesn't even make sense.
mm-hmm.
But to go for the variance, which the variance was very easy to get, going through, and it was an application, it was approved in minutes at the planning commission, within the city limits, but it made sense. And if something like that makes, now we're not trying, I mean, like you said, you know, if everything had to be over a couple of inches in the whole county, that's totally different. But some things, code doesn't meet everything as it is. I mean, it's some things that are older that just don't make sense, but, I mean,
Yeah.
that's just one example of something very simple that would require a variance.
Well, here, I'll give you an easier solution. So in a case like that, from my standpoint, the thing to do is to put a provision in the code that says if you're in an established neighborhood where the average setback is, you can build to the average setback.
And that makes sense too.
So, and then you don't need a variance, it's already written into the code, you just come in and show, this is my average setback and I've met it. Just,
Makes it a lot simpler.
so,
Yeah, there may be ways to look at where eliminating requirements for setbacks and or eliminating requirements for variances where it doesn't make sense. That could be another method to address that.
yeah.
I think
Well,
that's-
be careful,
And-
in this
and
instance when asking for, average setbacks, because, as a surveyor, I'll tell you what, it gets very expensive when you have to start surveying up and down the road, averaging each house, to a setback. So you might want to look at, the extra cost burdens for this example versus the previous example, so.
Gotcha.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
Okay, yeah, and then the other, alternative that, we might want to consider adding to the code at some point is just, a lesser variance where, you know, maybe you have to go the inch over your property line for whatever reason. You can't redesign the building, there's just, it's the only way it will ever work. Where you could do that without having to go for a public hearing, where you could do a, you know, set of findings at the staff level. What's that?
Like at a director's discretion or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah, or, you know, if somebody comes in for their final inspection and dump along the ocean, we require a final height survey to make sure you haven't gone over your maximum height. And there have been cases where people have come in 3 or 4 inches over, and then you have to work with that. And so having a discretion to say that if you are, you know, less than X percentage over, then, you know, you can get approved at the staff level. If it's more than that, then you have to go for a full-blown variance. Or if you just want to build taller because that's what you want to build, then you're going to have to go to the hearings officer, or whichever body ends up hearing variances to get your variance approved.
Might see somebody in some waters.
So if we were gonna have a discussion about variances, could we get a report maybe of what people are asking for variances for the last 5 years?
Yeah, we haven't had, we had one for parking out in Westport. which I think with the code changes we did after that, he wouldn't have needed a variance. And we've got one coming up in Fishhawk Lake, where the slope of the property is such that they can't build a driveway or put parking in. They want to have on-street parking. So that would be a variance. And then I think there's a third one that might come in. It's down in Arch Cape, and I can't remember what it might be for, but and we did another one in Arch Cape because they wanted to build closer to the property line than the setback allowed. They were tearing down the existing house and building a new one, and the new one, they wanted to go closer to the property line, so. So I think we've had 3 that have actually been submitted in the past 7 years, maybe, and we might have a 4th one.
Not very often.
No, not very often. And like I said, it should be a rare thing. You shouldn't be handing out variances like candy. If you are, then something's wrong with your code.
I guess that's, if we're trying to look at housing and we're looking for issues that cause hangups in getting something done, I mean, it's more than just variances, and that's what we're trying to do. Variance procedure, or, I don't know. What else we can include in there, just different conditions, or even the general standards for some of this stuff, if we need to review some of those. Getting it more technical when someone comes in for a building permit for a home, what are the hangups? What's making it tough? And are there ways to address some of those things?
If you're talking about the actual building permit for the structural part of it,
Or the zoning permit, if, in this side
No.
of things, I guess.
I mean, housing is usually, if it's just a single-family house, it's usually pretty straightforward if it's not in a farm or forest zone, because they've got their whole set of standards. And that's under state law, and we're not gonna change that here in this room. Usually if somebody is coming in, it's because they don't have all their signatures on their agency form, who's providing the water, who's the sewer or septic, and did the fire marshal sign off? Or the fire chief. And part of that problem is sometimes tied to the fact that because the fire districts, don't have a lot of staff, the chiefs are busy, can't always get a hold of somebody to sign your agency review form. So that's part of it. I mean, we take pretty much everything, people hand-drawn, not to scale, even though the code says it should be to scale, you should have a north arrow and blah, blah, blah. So we take pretty much everything. I don't know, unless you're experiencing some hang-ups that I'm not aware of.
I'm not, no, I mean, I've been through it a number of times, and I think it's fairly easy to submit a almost complete application unless there's something you don't really know about, or I don't really know about. But it is difficult sometimes to track down fire chiefs for signatures, or water districts too, that are sometimes somewhat dysfunctional, or they don't meet that often, try to get a water sign off. Septic is usually done by DEQ or by the county in the county building, so that's either have a preliminary site evaluation or not for a rural site. But it can take a while to get the required signatures that you need, and I don't know if there's a way to streamline that or figure something out. Even a proper contact list of who to get hold of sometimes can be hard in some of these areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we do want to make sure that if you're building a house, that you do have water and septic and or sewer, and that the fire marshal or the fire chief knows about it, knows that he's got a new house he's going to have to cover in his district, and that he can get a fire truck up the driveway. So, I wouldn't just want to eliminate those.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah, I know you're not, but just in case anybody had that thought, no.
It seems to me, in light of the LA fires, that the problem that we have is buildable land not so much the restrictions or the red tape at the planning department for building. And it's all those farm to forest acres that just sit there perfectly ready for development. And we say to ourselves, as Gail just said, this is not the place to handle that. It's got to be at the state. Why can't, like as Governor Newsom did, suspend CEQA, suspend the California State Coastal Act, right? These are huge hurdles that he just waved away with his hand. If our governor just sat down for a second and worked with all the counties and said, give me, 1,000 acres in all of your counties that are potentially buildable, that are zoned right now in an impermissible way, and just wave your hand and make them go away, and then just allow those acres to be zoned for development, we could solve a ton of problems. I mean, if Newsom can do it in California, in LA, on the coast, it can be done here. But this isn't the place to do it. But I know that's our problem, is buildable land. Kerry knows it. Commissioner Johnson knows it. All the other builders know it. That's the issue. And until we solve that problem, really, practically speaking, I just don't know how much we can make this process that Gail's talking about, that we're all witnessing, any easier. Because it seems pretty straightforward to me, and I know all you guys who build, and I know a lot of builders, and it's kind of hard, but it's not really all that hard. I don't know. That's just my perspective.
Yeah, I've said it before that we're surrounded by land here, but we can't build on very much of it. Lots and lots of land around these communities, but urban growth boundaries are so difficult to expand. Rural properties, you can't touch most of it. Got some issues, whether it's too steep or wetlands or wrong zoning, and those are the bigger issues that need to be addressed. And I don't know if there's pressure we can put on the state, or if there's more that we can do, that statement that can be made, that we can get some movement on that, because we've been talking about it for a long time. I think we know what the issues are, but very little's been done to address it. We just talk about it, that we don't have any affordable housing, there's nothing we can do, and the needle never moves. We just talk in circles about it.
Yeah, so, as you're aware, probably, next week, the legislative session begins, and it's a long session this year. So as we move through that, we'll be bringing you updates every month about the different bills that are relevant to the work that you're doing. A couple that we reviewed yesterday, one is Senate Bill 438, that would allow, anyone outside of an urban growth boundary to put a second dwelling unit on their property. There's not a size restriction, like the ADUs had a 2-acre minimum lot size. There's no size restriction, but it's restricted to a relative of the owner on the property. And so we're going to be tracking that one. There are some bills being proposed or have been proposed regarding expansion of urban growth boundaries. There is another bill that is looking to further limit housing development on farm and forest lands. It would take away the ability to do a replacement dwelling. It would take away the ability to do a template test, and a couple of other things that are on there. So, and the farm and forest rules that were just, became effective January 1st, they tighten up some of the things that are already in the Farm and Forest Code and take a lot of the case law and have codified that now. So there's a lot of push and pull, but the Farm and Forest seems to be tightening up, and it seems that there might be a bit of loosening in the rural residential areas. We'll just have to see.
It seems like
It's almost impossible to get those rezoned, isn't it?
Say that again?
It's almost impossible to get those areas rezoned within our own county.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's applied in the past 7 years, so I don't know. But, I mean, nobody's done a goal exception, and a goal exception is very hard. I mean, you're going to have to show that there is no other place. So say you've got a forest piece and you want to rezone it to RA5. You're going to have to show that there is no other RA5 land available. You're going to have to show that this is the only place that that RA5 zone could go. And I forget, there's a couple of other criteria, but I mean, you think a variance is hard, I mean, getting a goal exception is even harder.
And that's coming from the state.
Yeah, that's all big.
Rules for a goal exception dictated to our county, what we have to do to get it.
Mhm.
Is there, I kind of think we're getting a little bit off track into a bigger discussion here, but that's fine. Would there be a way, there's a lot of land within the county that is along rural roads that maybe, I know that we can't get it down to 1 acre zone, but would there be a way to make a zone change easier on properties that follow infrastructure and roads? Like, for example, I live along a county road and I have 12 acres, but I'm only allowed to put 1 home on that 12 acres. Whereas maybe I would like to be able to put two homes on there if it was practical. Or there may be other people in that same position that if they have property that follows infrastructure, that they could at least get it down to a 2 acre zone. Or expand the use in their existing zone to allow for, more dwellings.
So, in terms of rezoning, the process is always gonna be the same, and it's gonna depend on basically how many properties are included. If you're looking wholesale to just say, no more RA5, everything's gonna be RA2, then we've gotta notify all the property owners, and we can do that. It's still gonna be an ordinance that's gonna come to your planning commission, go to the board for 2 readings. I don't know, some people might oppose it because maybe they like having their 5 acres and not having their neighbor closer to them. If it's just you that comes in and says, my property's RA5, everybody around me is RA5, but now I want to be RA2, it's probably not going to work because we can't spot zone one property. So if you're in the middle of a group of RA5 and you yourself want to be RA2, it's probably not going to work, because it won't be legal. It'll be spot zoning, so.
At a state ORS?
That's just land use law across the nation.
What about expansion of rural communities, like, or just like an urban growth boundary would expand?
Mhm.
Is it possible to expand the boundaries of a rural community?
It is. I would have to look into what exactly it entails. I know when they went through this process in 2003 to establish the rural communities, there's specific requirements regarding meeting a threshold of the number of residential units, mix of commercial and or industrial land. I mean, we can look at it. I don't know if enough development has occurred over the past 21 years that might justify an expansion, but it's something that could be considered.
All right. Back on track, and anything else under Articles 2 and 3 that anybody wants to bring up for concerns or changes? All right, let's move to agenda item number 3, fiscal year 24-25 work plan update.
Yeah, so, we've been doing the work plans since I think about 2020 and been bringing them to the planning commission. We give you quarterly updates just so you can see where, the land use planning division is in their work. This update is really presented more, for information, and if you have any questions, we are hoping to finalize up about 3 or 4 big projects before the end of June 30th. Which is the end of the fiscal year. So one of them is our clear and objective standards, which we've just been talking about. The economic opportunities analysis, Jay will be bringing a second draft of that to your planning commission next month to look at. And that presentation is going to focus primarily on the recommendations, because you've seen the beginning part with the narrative and the background, but this would actually bring forward the recommendations for you to look at and give us some input on and direction. And then the updates to goals 16, 17, and 18, we are hoping to bring those probably in May, forward to your planning commission. We'll probably do another work session in between now and then, but then do a public hearing probably in May, if not June, and then have that, project pretty much wrapped up. So that would take 3 big items off of our work plan and free up staff time. and we'll talk about this more in the next, item. But, other than that, the only other thing that's still lingering out there that's kind of up in the air is the, biological opinion and the pre-implementation compliance measures. And we're waiting to see yet, the, Coalition of Oregonians for Floodplain Protection. They have filed a preliminary injunction, to see if they can get a halt to the implementation of the PICMs. And we're waiting to hear from that to see, what the courts may say. And so we're waiting on that along with some other things. If nothing changes, I would expect that we will come back to the Planning Commission then with the model ordinance, probably in March for a public hearing. Yeah, but anyway, unless there's, any questions about anything on the 24-25 work plan? Any of the work?
Next item?
Okay, so then that kind of segues into, the next item, which is looking at the fiscal year 25-26 work plan. And so, as I said, we are hopeful that by June 30th, staff will have a lot more free time because we have completed pretty much all of our big projects from this year's work plan. And so we have been trying to pull together new projects, and there's a list of them starting on page 127 of your agenda package. We know that because it's a long session, we know that because there's a lot of housing-related bills that are going forward, a lot of farm forest bills that are going forward. We are most likely going to have a lot of updates to our law doc once the session ends. And so we have been trying to do those annually to keep our codes up to date. So that's going to be on our work plan. We know that there are new farm forest rules already in effect. We have some changes with cultural rules effective January of next year that will require every jurisdiction to send out notices to the affected tribes whenever we get a conditional use permit or rezoning application in. So we're going to need to amend our codes to address those. One of the things that we have been talking to the fairground and the county manager's office about is we know the fairgrounds needs to update its strategic plan, and knowing that nobody has a lot of money, and staff is going to have some time to dedicate to a project that we have been working with the fairground manager and the fair board, trying to pull together some information. We know that the fairgrounds needs to update its conditional use permit, which hasn't been looked at since 1994, and has a lot of things that are prohibiting their growth and events out there. So we're going to be working with the fairgrounds to address those things. And we're starting now, but it will really kick in at the start of the new fiscal year. We've kind of talked to Parks about updating their master plan as well. Their master plan hasn't been updated since 2006. And again, it's not something that our budget can the county-wide budget can accommodate. So we're hoping that we can work with them. There's still transfer of fees between departments, but it'd be significantly less than if they had to hire an outside consultant to work on that. We know that we need to update our sign regulations. We have some amendments that came out of the child care barriers work group that the county staff sat in on. We did update our code recently, but we have a few more recommendations about how we could even remove even more barriers, so we'll be bringing those forward. Communication towers is another thing that we haven't addressed in probably 20 years in our code, so that needs to get updated. And then there is this forest lands density transfer program at the state level that we would like to do some research on and see if that's something that the county wants to pursue. The Regional Housing Task Force. So they're going to be wrapping up their grant work with the land inventory and the infrastructure inventory, and then as the cities are moving forward to consider UGB expansions, there will be work that we would have to do to on our side to amend our codes and possibly work with the cities as well if they need any assistance. So those were items that staff have identified along with all the 5,000 other things we talked about as part of chaos this morning. But we really wanted to get your input, as the planning commission about things that you feel that the planning staff should be looking at for the next fiscal year in terms of our workload. You're like, where to start?
I think that we've just discussed it, and I don't know if there's anything we can do at our level. I think that
We need to come up with our own language for a bill.
or something, I mean, it's inevitable. It's not, we're not gonna stop the growth here, we're just not. We need to start looking at some of our lands that are available and how we can either rezone, reclassify. I don't know. I don't know what it is. That's my biggest concern. I hear it constantly by people who say, oh, you're a planning commissioner. Well, we need more property. We need more lands. And it's not just people that are building, people in my industry. It's people that are working, people that work at the hospitals, and this is also a municipality problem. I mean, it's a countywide statewide problem. But those are the things that I don't like being told or hearing people tell people, no, you can't. It's the thing that I would like to hear is that's not permitted, but what could we do to help, or how can we all work together to, I mean, this is a big problem, right? And we're not gonna solve it, like you said, right here in this room, but what can we do as our part? If something's not legal or not permitted, or like Carrie said, I mean, we're not gonna come up with our own laws, well, maybe, I don't know, or even if we could make recommendations to people in Salem that do this stuff, and as a county, what can we do to help more lands? I don't know if I'm saying it good enough, but.
No, I understand what you're saying. And the county does work with a lobbying firm, and the lobbying firm works with the board, because ultimately, I mean, you as a planning commission can send recommendations up to the board. You can talk to your board members directly. You can speak at a public meeting as an individual. But ultimately, it's the board's strategic plan that guides our legislative efforts in Salem and in DC. And so every year, the board updates that plan. Housing is always on the list, but, I mean, even counties like Deschutes and Marion and Lane, you know, bigger counties that have a little bit more influence maybe, or carry more weight with the legislature, they're struggling with the same issues. You know, with that, they just don't have enough land. They have land, but they don't have enough land. Does that make?
It's weird.
You know, so it's
the
all
land.
of us. And even with counties banding together through AOC, it's a state thing. It's a political thing. It's a state thing. It's many things, and I don't know how you fix it.
It just seems like at our county level, our cities, all of them are bordered by water. So they're not going one direction, right? They can't
Yep.
go that way, and then if they go the other two directions, they run into each other.
Mhm.
So there's only one direction to go, and that's county land. That's the land that we are working with, that we can try and figure out. And, I mean, a lot of people wanna live rurally. They don't really wanna live in cities. I mean, I hear it all the time, and that's making some of our land available for how we do it. Like I said, I'm
Mhm.
I think one thing that I'm seeing is there's gonna be even more pressure from outside interests coming out of California and all over the place, not just California.
Mhm.
And it's applying pricing pressure, because sometimes they bring California dollars up here, much more valuable real estate that they've sold or whatever, and they can pay more money for properties, and they may even inflate their values just because there's so little supply. It puts a lot of pressure on whatever there is for sale, that it can drive up that price, and it's pricing our local people out.
Mhm.
That's been an ongoing problem, but it's only gonna be exacerbated by what's California. And I know I've built homes for people that were escaping fires on more than one occasion that, have been coming up here specifically, either because their home burned, or they're concerned about wildfires. They're just done with all that, and they're coming this way.
Mhm.
And we have expansion going. Our hospitals are getting bigger. They're gonna need more people, they're gonna need more housing, and it's a city problem, but it's also our problem.
Mhm.
But that's probably one of my biggest concerns. The floodplain thing and the FEMA stuff, I know we're kinda waiting on that, but that's another big concern, 'cause that affects everybody. I mean, that's probably not at our level, but we can keep expressing how our concerns with it and whatnot, but. Anybody online? Jeremy, Katie, Mike, you guys have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, just, I'm just gonna mimic everything you guys have said. You guys have a very lively conversation, often, and so, especially in your positions. And I don't, as far as adding anything to their workload, there are things that we'd like to see it. I'm right there with you. I don't know that there's a way to specify that, which they're not already working on. But it's all those things, looking for land. Like you said, the hospital's expanding. I just dealt with, even my own regular doctor has lost one of their doctors, so I can't even get in to see him till February for an urgent thing. So it's like, we don't have the housing for professionals even, I mean, it's a big problem. And of course, the state knows it too. But so as far as, to Gail's question, as far as adding or things we want to see, I I think you guys are really thorough, and I appreciate all the work you're doing. And yeah, I just don't know that there's anything that I could specify to say, hey, go in this direction, that you haven't already. But yeah, anyway, that's my 2 cents, just to say I concur with the things you guys have been discussing. And we are here. I'm listening. I'm sick, so I don't want to get you guys all sick.
Yeah, I think the county staff is doing an excellent job. And I think we're really lucky to have so many qualified staff members. And I just think it's great. I think for a small county like we've got, I am super impressed. Having lived all over the United States and worked and interfaced with a lot of different municipalities, county agencies, and so forth, I'm just super happy with what we have here. And just to sort of mirror some of the comments right before, Commissioner, I don't know how to say your name. Can you say? And anyways, yeah, all of the stuff, running from fires, Californians coming. The good news for all of us here that have the resources is that Californians are used to price gouging, right? Whether you want to admit that you're doing it or not, it's our duty to take advantage of scarcity, because we are still in a capitalistic society. And if Californians in their neighbors down there can charge $8,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, certainly we can sort of take advantage of some of those opportunities of scale ourselves. And is it good for the locals? It's not. Is it good for us? Maybe for a short term. But man, if the Californians start coming up here, I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, they have a little bit, but my goodness, I seem to have spent my life running away from Californians, and there's no place you can go. And hopefully they all go to Boise. That's enough for me.
I have just a half-formed thought, so I might be way off base here. I know that in the past, the cities and the counties, or the county has done these type of projects where they're trying to identify buildable lands. I don't know how truly useful the end result of those is to, you know, a developer. So maybe Commissioner Johnson or Commissioner Krushauer could comment on that. But thinking along the same type of lines, is there a way that the county could maybe identify some areas where the infrastructure would make sense? You know, it's not in a floodplain, not resource lands. There's roads, things like that, and then work backwards. You know, if we can identify, and I don't know where, I don't have a specific example in mind, but let's say we can identify a place where it meets all those things, and from a practical standpoint, it does make sense to have some housing. Can we work backwards off of that and then see, you know, once we've identified maybe some areas, and then see what we can do as far as a rezone or changing things that would make it make more sense?
Yeah, so Commissioner Linder, we're actually working on that right now as part of the Regional Housing Task Force. And the task force received a grant from the state last January to do exactly what you just discussed. They're looking at buildable lands, they're looking at the infrastructure needed to serve those lands, and we have completed all the map review, and there are some preliminary draft reports that have come out. This includes the unincorporated rural communities in Clatsop County, so Arch Cape, Miles Crossing, Jeffers Gardens, Westport, Napa, Swenson. And so those are all being looked at, and I think that Jay Blake, our planning manager, is on the call, and he's been working with that task force, and he can probably give you an update on that. And we're making him a panelist, so give him a moment.
I think if you say my name 3 times, I will appear. Isn't that how that works? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jay Blake, the planning manager. And the county, can you hear me okay? Okay, great.
Yeah, now we can.
All right, thanks. We have been working through the Regional Housing Task Force on almost exactly what you're talking about here, identifying areas where infrastructure exists within municipalities as well as in our rural communities, and where development potential can occur. Each of the cities is going to be receiving in the next month a report on their infrastructure, a report on vacant lands, and so that work is being done. The hardest part about this, and Community Development Director Hendrickson has already alluded to this, is changing the rural land from resource lands is a very high bar, and it's not something that any one county can lean into and change. It's got to happen from a larger perspective. But we are doing what we can given the statewide restrictions on rural development that exist, and we're really simply trying to support the municipalities in creating new developable lands, or at least highlighting and getting infrastructure to those areas. So I think that's all I need to add at this point, unless you have any additional questions.
No, I think that kind of answers my questions. I appreciate the explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Linder, and we are working on it. You will be seeing a report probably in the next couple of months from the Housing Task Force.
All right. Anybody else have anything? I would like to say, I think this is a great idea, and I know that the commission's working on it as well, or with the county manager, the fairgrounds strategic plan. That is, I think we underutilize that area, and that should be bumped up to a priority here. The kids need it, the community needs it, everybody needs it, whatever we can emphasize or improve or build on that fairgrounds. I think that is a staple in our community, you know, county-wide. Whatever our commission can do, I would like to see that bumped up to whatever we can do. I think that's probably one of the most important things on here that I see that I would like to see as a prioritize.
Okay.
And the commission's working on that as well, right? I know there's things in place.
Yeah, so, I don't know exactly what the commission is working on. They are in regular communication with the Fair Board, and as part of this, as we do a strategic plan update, there's gonna be a joint meeting just so everybody, the board can establish the parameters, because ultimately the board oversees. And then, just make sure that we're all on the same page, and then just start reaching out, getting the community input, interviewing the stakeholders, getting that conditional use permit updated, which I think will be a big help. And I think, we're actually gonna be meeting with the Fair Board again, February 4th, I think is their next regular meeting, but we'll probably have a special meeting next week just to go over the application in general before they do an official approval on February 4th.
All right. I forgot where we're at now. Are we moving to status report?
Yeah, not much updates on the status report. It's gonna tie in with my director's report, but our Law Duck housing amendments, have been filed or appealed to LUBA. So we are waiting on that. The record's been submitted, and, there's a period now where the appellee, gets to review the record we submitted. If there's any disputes about what's in the record, then we have to correct that. Once the record is free and clear, so to speak, then there are, the ORCA would file a motion, I guess, or a petition stating what their, reasons for the appeal are. And then from there, we start the lawyering and we go to a public hearing, so it's still several months out yet. The rules are in effect, but we tell people if they come into the counter that you are doing this at your own risk, because if something were to happen at the state appeal level, and for some reason the ordinance was remanded or repealed, they're stuck with something that isn't legal anymore, so. Anyway, but that kind of ties into my director's report. So we talked about the housing amendments. The EOA, as I said, will be bringing draft 2 to the Planning Commission in February. Goal 16, 17, 18, we are doing the reviews. We've done the reviews of drafts to Goal 18, and some Law Duck amendments. We're working through 16 right now in Article 6, which deals with the Columbia River Estuary, the Nicanicum, and Ecola Creek estuaries. And this is a section of code that hasn't been touched in well over 30 years, so it's a lot of cleanup and work to go through there. So we're going through it a little bit slower than we anticipated, but still making progress. Jay talked about the Housing Task Force. Short-term rental caps, we did the second public hearing on January 8th. We went through a round of public hearings at the end of last year, and then we made some changes to the transfer language so that short-term rental permits would be able to be transferred even with the cap in place. That necessitated a new round of public hearings because it was a significant change. So we did the first one of those this last Wednesday. We'll be doing the next one next Wednesday. The fee increase has been continued to February 26th. The board has asked staff to go back and do some additional research, which we're in the process of doing, and we'll bring that back on February 26th. Army Corps, I did a meeting with the Port of Portland last Friday, who's going to be the applicant for the Army Corps applications. And they are still anticipating a February submittal with a public hearing in April with the Planning Commission. The only other thing is that I sent an email out this morning, so most of you may not have seen it, but there is some required ethics and public meeting law trainings that you as planning commissioners will all need to complete at least once during your term. So the county is looking to put together a session for the board that, of course, you are more than welcome to attend. But in the meantime, there is also a training on February 4th up at the college. And that training is from 2:30 to 5 p.m. at Columbia Hall. There's a registration link in the email as well, and it is capped at 60 participants. So if you're interested in attending that to complete your obligations, you are more than welcome to do so. Otherwise, we'll have something jointly with the board at some point in the future. And I think that's all I have.
Do you know if we've already done this or not?
This is a new law that the state has passed, so everybody's got to go through it.
So many classes.
Yeah.
The people would like, if we would like to go to the one at the college, we are still going to do one with the board
Mhm.
at some point, whether it's online or virtual or in person or.
Yeah, the county manager's office is working on scheduling that. And so once we get that done, it'll be open to, the planning commission, the board, and the fair board members, and any other advisory committee.
Perfect.
For all advisory committees, and anybody that participates in any type of, have that type of training?
I have not looked that deeply into it. It just says that,
Is ethics training in there?
it's not ethics training, it's public meetings law. And so it says it's for all governing bodies, school boards, governing bodies, governmental bodies, county and city councils, budget committees. So definitely the planning commission, the fair board, and I would expect that any other advisory committee, because that would just be a governmental body. They're gonna be looking at public meetings law, mandatory training requirements for governing board members, record keeping and certification, who should attend, governing board members, public officials, and anyone engaged in public meeting processes.
Gail, you said it was, at Clatsop Hall, February 4th from 3 till when?
2:30 to 5 p.m. on February 4th at Columbia Hall, room 219, up in the, community college.
Thank
She
you.
emailed that.
Yep.
Did she?
She emailed it.
Yeah, I sent it this morning.
Okay.
I gotta say, I know that some of us got on the board, no clue. Served on several boards, but might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
All right, I thought we just did this, but
We just did an election for vice chair a few months ago, because we had a vacant position.
so election of officers. Yes, at this time I open it up for, would anybody like to
I would
nominate any?
I'm ready to nominate, Jason Crushhour as chair, if he's willing to continue serving as chair.
I'd like to second that.
Doing a great job.
Doing fine.
All right, anybody else? No? I will continue as chair if Commissioner Johnson continues as vice chair, and there's only one nominee for chair. Do we have to do a vote?
You still have to do a vote.
Okay.
but-
Is there
You
any
can do
other
a voice
nominees
vote.
for chair? Okay, so let's put that to a vote. We have to do a roll call. Favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? All right, awesome. Nominees for vice chair.
Well, if Carrie's willing to do a second term, I would nominate Carrie Johnson.
I will.
Anybody else? Any other nominations?
As long as you're never absent.
All right, nominations will be closed. All those in favor for Commissioner Johnson as vice chair, aye?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right. Team that done and over with. Anything good of the order? Anybody have anything good of the order? No? All right. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good day.